Well, good morning. This is Barry Odell with the Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring Facebook page. And it is Monday morning, December 13th, 2021. And we've got folks joining on the stream. There's Gail. I see Connie Barden over on the Near Churches page. Good morning, Connie. Good to see you. I'll give a little bit to let some other folks join. Good morning, Anna. Anna, if I remember correctly, you're from Tiptonville, Tennessee. Let us know how things are over there. I know things got pretty rough there Friday night and early Saturday morning. But glad to see you on here today. Good morning, Diana. On our page, Diana Literal. But then we have another Diana on the Near Churches page. Good morning to you. Okay, so we're starting a new study today, and this is a viewer-requested study, and I like to do those because it challenges me, and it gives you an opportunity to give me some feedback on what we're studying through. And I don't remember exactly who requested this particular study, but it's very interesting, something I've always been interested in and have put some study into over the years, so hopefully we can get something out of this. Good morning, Miss Barbara. Good to see you today. So I've entitled it, and it's from Exodus chapter 12 and verse 12, where God said that he would strike against all the gods of Egypt and that he would execute judgment against them. So, hey, there's a few more. Good morning, Lyle. Good morning, Linda. So, I guess we'll go ahead and get started a bit now, but man, to look at all the gods of ancient mythology, whether we're talking about like Sumerian gods or Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Roman, Greek, I suppose you could spend decades looking at all of that and all of the beliefs that are or that were associated with mythology and all the various cultural like creation accounts and how things came to be and how even various gods came to be. There's no way I can do all that. There are, there are experts who do that kind of stuff, historians. There's a lot of good information, obviously, on the internet. There's so much that you can learn by just a simple Google search. But we're going to focus in on, obviously, the 10 plagues. We're going to kind of set some groundwork today with the... Well, I guess you'd say with the history of Israel in Egypt, because that is so significant to what we're dealing with here. And I'm going to have to do some balancing work here because I've got a PowerPoint, but I've also got the comments on the church page, but then also on the Near Churches page. So you may have to bear with me a bit as I'm working through all of that. But anyway, glad to see you folks joining on today. As always, if you have any questions or comments as we're going through this, feel free to add that to the comments section, and I will address them if I see them, or when I see them. So, okay, against all the gods of Egypt. Well, to begin with, I thought what we would do is just, go over a little bit of history, biblical history. Joseph, I guess you would say the story of Egypt. Well, the first time Egypt is mentioned is in Genesis chapter 12, and I think it's verse 10. First time we read of that place in the Bible. But, it's an ancient civilization, and quite interesting to study. But I guess for our purposes, okay, so how did God's people get there? That's the question it really comes down to. Well, Joseph, we remember, was the son of Jacob's old age, and he was the favorite. You can read all this in Genesis chapter 37, and his brothers hated him. He began then having dreams. He told those dreams to his brothers and to his father, and the envy, the hatred grew even more, and ultimately they sold him. And ultimately he ended up in Egypt. And then as he was in Egypt, you can read this in Genesis chapter 39, the way he conducted himself, and because of God's providence, I would say too, to a great extent, is that during that time that he was in Egypt, he rose to power. Very powerful state, in fact. And so that's kind of the background of how God's people moved to Egypt. God had promised Abraham, as we have recorded all the way back in Genesis chapter 12, of a land that he would receive and that his descendants would receive, but that they would spend time in Egypt first. 4 generations they would spend in captivity. Let me, I think I misquoted that as I was thinking about it. So you go back to Genesis chapter, let me see here. Yeah, Genesis chapter 15, when God is speaking with Abram about his covenant. Hey, good morning, Sheila. Good to see you today. So back to Genesis chapter 15, when God was speaking to Abraham. Genesis 15:13. He said to Abram, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years." So that, again, Genesis 15:13. Well, that's prophetic of what was going to take place in Egypt. And the Bible speaks of this period of time in several different places. Let's see, Genesis 15:14. "And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge afterward." Or rather, I will judge, okay? And then afterward, they shall come out with great possessions. Now, all of that is fulfilled in God, in the process of God executing judgment against all the gods of the Egyptians. All right. Genesis 15:15. "Now as for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a good old age. But in the 4th generation they shall return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." So the land promise that was given to Abraham would ultimately be fulfilled after his death, okay, and some time after his death. But all the way back to Genesis 15, you have the prophecy of the descendants of Abraham being slaves to a foreign nation for 400 years, and that then they would be restored. So that kind of lays some groundwork for us as we progress through this study. One of the things that led to Israel, Jacob was initially his name, Jacob and Esau, the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, ultimately becoming the nation of Israel, okay, the 12 tribes as we know them. Esau, his brother, became the Edomites, the Edomite nation, which they are, they're on the other side of the Jordan River, let's just say it that way. Well, as you read Genesis chapter 46, let me get my Bible over there, there arose a severe famine in the land of Canaan. And so God permitted Jacob and his family to go down to Egypt for grain. And all of the, I don't think these are just happenings. I think we see the providence of God throughout all of this. We have those promises all the way back there through, given to Abraham, and then throughout the book of Genesis, we see these things developing and these promises being fulfilled throughout time. Excuse me. Fulfilled throughout time. Well, then we get to Genesis chapter 46. Of course, Joseph is already in Egypt. He's already risen to power. His brothers have already been there, looking for grain, looking for food, and a lot of things intervene from Genesis. A lot of things happen in the intervening time from Genesis 39 to what we read here in Genesis 46. So beginning in verse 1, it says, "So Israel took his journey with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' And he said, 'Here I am.' So he said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes.'" Of course, we're familiar, again, going back to Genesis chapter 37, initially Jacob thought Joseph was dead. Well, again, in the process of time, as Jacob's other sons and Joseph's brothers come down to Egypt, ultimately Joseph reveals himself to his brothers that he's in fact not dead. Now Jacob is going to be heading down to Egypt and sustained there. And again, we cannot ever forget the providence of God. And in fact, Diana says here, "We see his providence, but I know that they probably didn't at the time." Just like we ask, why did this happen today? And we don't know. And we don't know that it's not working for good. That it's not working for, okay. So, and I've said that before, particularly in reference to Joseph. and how things worked out for Joseph in his life. The idea of providence, so the miraculous and the providence are two extremely different things. Okay, the miraculous was immediate, observable, and undeniable, whereas providence is kind of like the operation of God behind the scenes. And so the way I've illustrated that specifically with the life of Joseph is like I don't think he was ever sitting in the bottom of that pit that his brothers dug for him, who initially wanted to murder him. I don't think he was sitting there thinking, hey, this must be the providence of God. Everything's going to be great. Now, as you read in Genesis chapter 50, okay, once all that's happened and his family's been preserved, all right, now Joseph can look back on that. And listen to this, Genesis 50, beginning in verse 19. So Jacob's dead. Now it's just Joseph and his brothers. His brothers are afraid. All right, what's he going to do with us? Well, really, I guess you might say they had the right to be afraid for what they had done. So anyway, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me. But God meant it for good, in order to bring it about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. I don't think Joseph was thinking that way when he was being sold into slavery. So, okay, yeah, Diana clarifies her statement. It sounded confusing. I meant God's providence today. We do not see it happening today, just as they didn't see it happening then. And I think that's exactly right, Diana. Whereas, again, the miraculous was absolutely unquestionable, and we're going to talk about that as we talk about these signs that Moses was given to perform in the presence of the Egyptians. There was no question about that. But look at the life of Joseph and all the things that he endured from the time he was a young man, sold into slavery, betrayed by his brothers, lied about to his father that he was dead, and then he saves all their lives. So there is quite a difference between the providential and the miraculous. So anyway, severe famine led to Jacob going down to Egypt. That's recorded for us in Genesis 46. And also there in Genesis 46, God told Jacob, I will make of you a great nation while you are there. Okay, flip over to Exodus chapter 1 and you can read about that. God was with them, and they did just that. Let's see. Well, it's Exodus 1:7. The children of Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, and multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. That's God keeping his promise. That's not miraculous, okay? These people are reproducing, but God promised that would happen, that they would multiply and become a great nation. And of course, that promise even goes back to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. So they do this, and then you have the turning point in their history in that particular condition, and that's Exodus 1 and verse 8. There arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. All right, so that's when the switch flips, you might say, in the story. So Moses, and I'm not going to go into detail about all the early events of Moses' life, but Moses, when he was 80 years old, and his brother Aaron was 83, they are called to go to Pharaoh, and they are called to free Israel. Now, you can look at Exodus 6 and verse 20. Exodus 6:20 tells us that Aaron and Moses were brothers. Their parents' names were Amram and Jochebed. And then you look at Exodus 7:7. Moses was 80, Aaron was 83 when they went to speak to Pharaoh. So all of those details are given to us. Stephen in Acts chapter 7 gives us some detail about all these events, but that's what we have here, and their purpose is to go there to speak to Pharaoh to free the Egyptians. So you look like at Exodus 7 and verse 5, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch out my hand on Egypt and bring out the children of Israel from among them. So how was that accomplished? Okay, Pharaoh's certainly not going to just listen to some guys that come out of the wilderness to talk to him. Well, Exodus 7:4 tells us that Pharaoh will not heed you, so that I may lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies out and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. Okay, that's kind of key right there. He's bringing them out by great judgments. Well, that's a reference to the 10 plagues. And the reason we know that is because of Exodus chapter 12 and verse 12. Now, this is after the first 9 plagues and just preceding the 10th plague. This is during Exodus 12 is during the time that we have recorded that the Passover feast for the Jewish nation was instituted. So, and it was under the context of the death of the firstborn, the 10th of the 10 plagues. Exodus 12:12 says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment." So you couple that with Exodus 7:4, he's going to deliver them by great judgments. That's what he means. He's going to condemn, he's going to bring down all the gods of Egypt. So that kind of lays some groundwork, and that went a little bit longer than I had anticipated. So we'll get started this morning with just a couple of the signs. And that's so interesting because frequently when you read this text, these early chapters of Exodus and the accounts of the plagues that were brought up against Egypt, they are called signs. And so, I think of the New Testament and all the signs that were performed, and one of the stated purposes of signs throughout the Bible is to produce faith in those who witnessed them. All right, so for instance, remember in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, it says, "Many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe." Okay, so these signs that would be performed against the Egyptians, and we'll notice this as we go through the plagues, produced faith in some of the witnesses, not all of them. One of the things that God one of the things that God told Moses would happen was that Pharaoh would harden his heart, and we see that recurring throughout the implementation of the plagues. Not everybody believes, and so that happens with Moses and Pharaoh. That happens with Jesus, even with people rejecting his signs or asking for more signs after he had just performed signs. So let's get started here today, and we'll probably only cover the first one or second one maybe. So what I want to do is lay out for you the case that Exodus 12:12, "I will execute judgment against all the gods of Egypt." Well, I think there's a very special way that we can look at that, because it's not that each plague singled out some specific god that looked like that plague, okay? But the plagues as they came struck in a way upon various gods, and sometimes more than one god. And so I hope to lay that case out for you as we look at these. So the first one, and this is kind of interesting because this isn't one of the plagues. This is the sign, and this is in chapter 7, verses 8 through 13. I'll put all the scriptures up there for you. This was the initial sign that Moses and Aaron were told to give to Pharaoh when they approached him. Let's see. Exodus 7, beginning in verse 8, God instructing them, okay, when you speak to Pharaoh, or when he speaks to you, saying, "Show me a miracle for yourselves," then you shall say to Aaron, "Take your rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and let it become a serpent." So Moses and Aaron, they did that. It became a serpent, but Pharaoh also called the wise men, and they did the same thing. So we see this a couple of times in the early judgments, let's say, against the gods of Egypt, where the magicians are able in some fashion to somewhat, and I'm going to say it that way because I think that's the accurate way to say it, to somewhat duplicate the signs that Moses and Aaron were given by God. So the Egyptians were able to do that, okay, cast down their rods, and they became serpents. Let's see, that's Exodus 7, verses 11 and 12. But look at the end of verse 12. There's a difference made. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. Well, when you look into Egyptian goddess history or Egyptian deity history, there's a god by the name of Apophis or Apep. And this was a serpent, and he's known kind of as the deity of chaos. And one of the interesting things is that these gods of the ancient world, and what I mean by that is like these ancient civilizations, again, whether Egypt or Mesopotamia, whatever, these gods were often evil and simply punitive gods, and sometimes the gods were at war among themselves. And so this rod to a serpent sign was a direct strike against this Egyptian god, but he was the deity of chaos, and he was an enemy of another Egyptian god, Ra, the sun god. It was believed that when the sun set, and again, this is why it's so hard to deal with all this, I would say, because they had 4 gods that were sun gods. One of the rising sun, one of the setting sun, various gods of the sun. Ra was one of those. And in Egyptian mythology, it was believed that when the sun set, when that god essentially went down, he went into the underworld. And as he's in the underworld, you have this Egyptian deity of chaos that would attack him and attack his ship as he's sailing through the underworld. Again, there are others who know a lot more about this, but that's kind of a summation of their belief. So Aaron and Moses cast down their rods and it becomes a serpent. Well, to an Egyptian, the serpent is a god. And their serpents swallow up the serpents of the magicians of Pharaoh, which would be indicative that the god, or gods, however the Egyptians may have viewed it, that Moses and Aaron served were greater than theirs because Moses and Aaron's serpent was able to eat theirs. If you can follow all of that. So while that's not one of the 10 plagues that we typically think of, it is the first sign that indicates there is something superior about the God of Moses and Aaron as compared to the gods of Pharaoh and those magicians. I think it's a good place to stop for today. I try to keep these videos, 20 minutes or so. Sometimes I go a little over, but I wanted to lay some good groundwork for us today to understand where we are in biblical history. And but I also wanted to talk about this one because while it's not one of the 10 plagues, it was one of the signs that were given to Moses and Aaron to prove that they were not just some couple of strange guys that wandered out of the wilderness. They had the power of the gods, in the view of the Egyptians, who were polytheistic. These guys had the powers of the gods. And so as we kind of develop this study, you're going to see that from the perspective of the Egyptians, they become more and more convinced throughout the 10 plagues that there's a distinction, a great distinction between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt and goddesses of Egypt. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Appreciate you being on here today. Thank you, Connie. I don't see any questions or comments other than what I've already addressed. Let me close this out real quick. All right. So I don't see any questions or comments, just all the greetings. It's good to have you all on here today. And the plan is, Lord willing, we'll be back here tomorrow at 11 o'clock, and we will start with the first of the 10 plagues. So hope you enjoy this study and it's some benefit to you. If you have somebody who doesn't do Facebook, as I've told you before, they don't do Facebook, but they would like to do a study like this, send them over to our YouTube channel, Mammoth Spring Church of Christ, and all this content is uploaded there. Let's see, here's a comment that's just come in. Diana says, with all the gods over the years, I have noticed they are mostly, that skipped on me. They are mostly gods of things they can see. I think it's hard for people to believe in a God they can't see. Yeah, that's interesting. And, Isaiah talks about that they're formed after man's imaginations. So that's a true statement. Thanks, Michelle. Good lesson. I'm glad I don't have to try to keep up with the umpteen gods. Yeah, you got that right. That would be hard to keep up with. I would say hundreds. Everything had a god, okay? So we'll talk about that as the lessons go. All right, guys, appreciate y'all being here today. Hope you have a good day, and hope you're able to be back here tomorrow at 11, and we'll pick up in Exodus chapter 7.